Well, the semifinals are over and the championships are set. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're listening to us. I'm John Buzby. He's Marty Sheehan. And hard to believe, Marty, that we are at the end of the high school football season. Seems like yesterday they were practicing on August 16th, I think is what it ended up being. Some of them earlier because of the now infamous week 0. We'll see what happens with that next year. But we're at week whatever, and it's the last week, whatever that's going to be. And so it's an exciting time to be a high school football fan. It's an exciting time to be a high school player. Not so excited for a handful of people that are not going to play at the University of Delaware, but we are thrilled for those that are going to have that opportunity. And they are, of course, Laurel is going to play St. Elizabeth in Class 1. And Class 2 will be Archmere and Woodbridge. And Class 3 will be Smyrna and Middletown. The unified division is yet to be set. Those semifinal games are going to be played on Tuesday. And those games are going to be, let me get my notes out here. Those games are going to be Newark Charter hosting Dover and Smyrna hosting Caesar Rodney High School. So 2 of those 4 teams will play in the 1:30 slot at the University of Delaware. The 11 o'clock slot is going to be Class 2. The 3:30 slot is going to be the big boys, Class 3. And then at 6 o'clock, they will kick off the Class 1 division. And so that's going to be your rundown for those events. Just making sure I got those times right. I do.
Yeah, saw a lot of complaints of people saying that these games are really squeezed in together, and
they are.
You put like a Smyrna Middletown game where there could be 80 passes, you might be there for 4 hours. So
I don't think I was listening to Benny Mitchell talk last night. He's doing the 6 o'clock game, and so he's got that last game, and he says I think I'm probably going to be here pretty late, and so it'll be interesting to see when that game actually kicks off. But you know what, the DIAA did what they have to do.
Oh,
and everybody wanted to play at the University of Delaware. And so you've got to be strategic about how you schedule it. I do believe, and I don't know this for a fact, that, they have that huge advantage. They have those turf fields right next to the stadium. And so a lot of the warm-up time should be spent on those fields. I get it. You need to come into the stadium. You need to spend probably 15 or 20 minutes warming up, seeing where the sun is, the wind, all that other stuff. You don't need your full hour or whatever the time is for people to warm up on the football stadium. So I imagine that's part of the strategy as well. But still, even then, like you said, I mean, last night's Middletown game ended, it was after 9:30, wasn't it? It was
a long one.
It was a long one. It was 2.5, pushing 3 hours. And so if that game starts at 3:30 and goes till 6:30, but again, you do what you got to do. If they schedule that game, that Class 1 game at 8 o'clock, everybody's complaining.
Oh yeah.
That is too late, and then they get there and the Middletown game had ended at 6 o'clock. See, I told you we could have played this game earlier. So, congratulations to the football committee and the DIAA. They did what they did. Players got what they want, which is to play at the Bob Carpenter Center. Right. And so that's the bottom line. And you know what, even if that final game does not kick off till 7 o'clock, whoever wins that game is going to be home in bed by 11 if they want to be.
And it'll be packed anyway, and regardless of when it starts.
So, yep, exactly. It's not going to keep any fans away. So we're going to start the podcast here just talking about how good were these semifinal games. And so Marty, at the end of the podcast, a little teaser here, he's kept track of a lot of stats throughout the tournament. And when I say stats, I don't mean player stats. I mean, number of running clocks, what were the scores, that type of thing. And so, that was one of the big things when they moved to this class system, was let's make it so the playoffs don't have the blowouts that they've had in the past, especially in the early rounds. Not sure they accomplished that. Marty's got some stats that will either defend that or not. And so stay tuned for that at the end of the podcast. But what I did, Marty, I actually just did it this morning. I went through and I looked at the halftime scores of the semifinal games, and the total halftime scores. And this was using a -10 for the Archmere DMA game because the team that actually lost that game was leading at halftime. And so the total halftime scores were 104-14. The total scores at the end of the game were 189-66. And so I kind of look at a game, if it's good at halftime, because that's the bottom line. The second half, a lot can happen either way, as Archmere and DMA proved. That game was 10-0 in favor of DMA, which eventually lost to Archmere. The Woodbridge game was 24-0. That game ended up being lopsided. Laurel Indian River 27-0. Again, that ended up 33-0. St. East Tatnall, that was 17-0 at the half. Didn't get much better. Smyrna Dover was 24-7 in favor of Smyrna at the half. Dover scored the first 2 touchdowns in the second half, and all of a sudden it's 24-21. So even though it kind of looks swayed one way at the halftime. It wasn't. Middletown South was 12-7 at the halftime, about as good as you want to get. Of the 6 games, Marty, and I'll be interested in your thoughts on this, I consider 3 of them to be good, quality, close games. And that was the Archmere DMA game, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
And then the 2 Class 3 games, Smyrna and Dover, which, if I'm at that Smyrna game at halftime, I may be thinking about getting out a little early and getting home.
Yep.
But those that did missed out on a great finish. And the same with Middletown South, 12-7. You can't ask for more than that in a game like that. And so those, I consider those 3 to be good quality games, what the committee's looking for. Woodbridge, Wilmington Friends, not so much. But again, that was a close game during the regular season. So, that it is what it is. Laurel, Indian River, overtime in a regular season. You'd think it'd be a great matchup. Didn't turn out to be. And then St. E's and Tatnall. So those are my thoughts. 3 out of the 6 were quality. No running clocks. No. I think that's a plus. I think that's a major plus for the committee to look at, is that there are no running clocks. You're going to have some lopsided games. There's a difference between a lopsided game and a running clock game, especially if that running clock happens, mid third quarter or something like that.
Right.
But I'll let you give your quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, 1A was the only one that had the really true blowouts. Both games, ironically enough, both games were 33-0.
I saw that. Yeah.
Laurel over Indian River and St. E over Tatnall. The funny thing is, Laurel and Indian River have not a lot of point between them. Laurel's outscored their 2 opponents 82-0, St. Elizabeth's 52-0. So something's got to give on championship Saturday. But no, I thought the same thing. I thought that the Middletown game, or the Smyrna game, excuse me, was a good game. It was not at halftime, no, but it kind of went exactly the same way the first one did. Where Dover climbed into it. They got within a touchdown in the fourth quarter in the first meeting during the regular season. They got to within 3 in the third quarter at this one. But in both cases, Middletown, lightning quick, put score after score on the board. Mm-hmm. So, it was a fun game to watch in the second half. I mean, of course, when it got to 24-21, I'm sure a lot of people felt like anything was possible. It was very fluky the way Dover got to 24-21. So I never really lost confidence that Smyrna wasn't in control of that game. We'll talk about that when we highlight the games. But yeah, I thought overall, and I tweeted yesterday, I said, if we had to sit through all these blowouts in the playoffs to get that DMA Archmere game, I was okay with that this year for the first year realignment, because that, to me, that was the game of the year that I've seen. It just a fantastic ball game. Not the prettiest of games, which I also tweeted out, but a very fun game and a real competitive contest.
All right, so let's take a look now. We're going to go like we've done all season. And again, we're not going to talk a lot about the championship games. We're going to do a preview of that as we've done the last few weeks throughout the playoffs. That'll drop on Thursday night. And so again, we're not going to look forward. We're just going to talk about what happened and our thoughts on that. So let's start down at Laurel. This was not an overtime game this time as it was during the regular season. Laurel and Indian River. Laurel scored 27 first half points. This game came 2 points shy of a running clock. The punting game hurt Indian River early on. The Laurel's rush of the punting game. 2 times, apparently, Indian River could not get the punt off. And then the third time it was blocked. So, that set Laurel up in great field position a few times. So, not sure what happened there. It'd be interesting. I looked and couldn't find quotes from the coach or anything like that. And Marty, not sure if you saw anything about, how or why that happened. But the way I saw it, the way I heard it, the way it was described is that basically the snap got back there and the punter couldn't kick it. So
that's right. Yeah. Basically he got swarmed before he ever got a chance to get the kickoff. This was the most, to me, this was probably the most lopsided game of the weekend, because not just a 27-0 score, but it was just a complete dominating performance from Laurel. I mean, they shut down everything. Indian River couldn't move the ball. They couldn't drop back to pass. They didn't have time to do anything. And the punt game, the 2 punt plays kind of encapsulates the whole thing. But, we talked about on the preview podcast that Laurel, they really struggled with this team the first time, and with the championship in sight, they weren't going to let it happen again. And this was, to me, probably the shocker of the weekend too, in terms of just the uncompetitiveness of the game. Indian River, again, just could not get anything going. They couldn't establish any kind of momentum. And after halftime, the second half was just kind of a coast. Laurel did what they needed to do to hold on to the ball. They had some sustained drives, and the defense just never let up through 4 quarters. So it's a great win for Laurel, who's back in the title game as a 1A. It's kind of interesting. Number 1 and 2 seeds made it in all 3 classes. So,
yeah, that was cool.
The point system worked. I mean,
Yeah.
it played out the way it was supposed to, and we all hoped it would. So, I said that Laurel and St. Elizabeth has been on collision course all season, and Laurel took care of their part on Friday night.
Laurel's been, they've won Division II titles back in 86, 87, 91. It was when I was in high school and early college. Actually, I was in college. You were in high school, Marty. And they've been in 4 other title games, the last in 2014. So good to see the Laurel Bulldogs get there. It'd be a good, I would expect a decent crowd coming up from Laurel. It'd be interesting to see what Laurel does, what Woodbridge does in terms of getting kids up here. Because, a lot of those kids aren't going to make that drive on their own. A lot of parents aren't going to make that drive on their own. We'll see what the school does anything. They're going to take on St. Elizabeth, also 33-0 winners over Tatnall. It was 13-0 at the half, so Tatnall still hanging in there. Tatnall, as you pointed out, Marty, only had 20 players dressed for this game. That's pretty incredible at this time of the season, that you're still playing, and you're playing hard. And who knows, you can't tell me all 20 of those players were completely healthy. Nobody is at this time of the football season. And so, I never felt like the Hornets were ever in it. Quasim Benson had 4 touchdowns. He's obviously healthy again. And so, it was, I don't think anybody expected Tatnall to win. The score was close, 13-0 at the half. So, you can't say it wasn't close. Sure, in the end, it wasn't close. But at the halftime, they were still in it. 2 touchdowns. If they do what Dover did, they're leading in the third quarter. They come out and score twice, but they didn't. So
no, this was Tatnall. They did what they could defensively. As a young kid, Stevenson on their line. I believe he's a freshman who was just a monster last night. And I tweeted out late last night that they made St. Elizabeth earn everything in this game defensively anyway. Quasim Benson got his 4 touchdowns, but it wasn't easy. I mean, Chris Character had to get in there and do some work, and a lot of them were some drawn out drives. Brett Smick threw more than I thought he would, which was great, because he's had a good season, but he needs to get into a flow, and he did that last night. But overall, this Tatnall team, 20 kids on the team last night. They only have 5 upperclassmen total on the squad. Now, perhaps for all we know, some of the ones who were injured last night were not the upperclassmen. So this is a really raw young team, and it showed. There were a myriad of times where they couldn't get the snap right. Which we saw with Odessa, which if you think about it, Tatnall and Odessa are not so dissimilar. Odessa, it's their first season, yes, and Tatnall's been around forever, but the makeup of their teams is very similar. They're all freshmen and sophomores.
Right.
So they were the most unlikely of semifinalists by a long shot, was Tatnall. If you had said they'd be in the semifinals, I think people would say you were crazy. But it's a plucky bunch. They've got a great coaching staff. And I think this is a team with a bright future. For St. Elizabeth, it was great to see Benson last night. There was a point in the third quarter where they used him a lot as a decoy, and I started to get worried that, oh boy, I wonder if he's banged up and they're just purposely not giving him the ball. But then they started feeding him again. And I tell you what, he made a cut in the fourth quarter that let me know that he's fine. He's going to be okay. Yeah. And which is going to be a handful for Laurel. But the good news for St. Elizabeth, again, is as they did in the first meeting with Tatnall, they got great efforts from Chris Character, who did a terrific job on the times where Benson didn't get the ball. And again, Brett Smick throwing the ball did a really nice job. So I thought the St. Elizabeth's defense did okay. They really, it's hard to kind of give them an incomplete, because Tatnall's offense really couldn't generate anything on their own.
Right.
So it was, it was kind of what we may have expected. We hoped that it would be a closer game, but in the end, the experience factor took over, and St. Elizabeth took over, and this was one of those methodical wins. I mean, 13-0 at the half, but then they just continued to grind it out in the second half. So looking forward to it. The first Division I final, St. Elizabeth and Laurel.
Yeah, and they're going to play at 6:00, as we said, on Saturday at the University of Delaware. And we'll mention it a couple times to remind people, remember, there's protocols to get into Delaware. You're not buying cash that day, or you're not paying cash for a ticket. You got to get your electronic ticket. You've either got to prove that you're vaccinated or have a positive or a negative test 72 hours within, and it can't be a home test. And there's a health check no matter what. So don't think you're just going to show up and show them your vaccination card. There is going to be a health check that you have to check into. So if you're not sure how to do it or where to do it or why to do it, find out, because you're not going to want to have to handle that situation there at the gate. The University of Delaware people do an outstanding job. I was at several, I think I went to all the home football games. University of Delaware never waited long in line. And there were 20, not 20,000, unfortunately. There were 10 or 12,000 people there for that. So all arriving close to the same time. So it should be a smooth check-in progress. Just remember, you got to do a daily health check that day. And you've either got to be vaccinated or have a negative test within 72 hours, and it can't be a home test. So keep that in mind. It's going to be St. Elizabeth's first final since 2010 when they beat Archmere. And so speaking of Archmere, they took down DMA 20-16. They were trailing 10-0 at the half. And one of the things that head coach John Bellis said, and I'll quote him, it's understanding in big moments how to settle down. That was part of his halftime speech. Chris Albaro talked about a brotherhood. That's what he talked about. I saw that there. He had 20. There were 20 second half points for Archmere, 13 in the fourth quarter to go up to the final score, 20-16 in that one. I was looking at Twitter like everybody does, and I saw a quote, and it's at Zanlo Lab. I don't know who he is, Zanlo Lab, but he said, you can kind of summarize the game like this: a 70-yard touchdown pass, a one-handed catch on a 2-point conversion, a safety, forced fumbles, and a late goal line stand. One thing he didn't talk, Marty, was about the unsportsmanlike conduct penalty that basically ended DMA's season. And I don't want to, we're not going to pin it on that kid for ending the season. But it was the final straw. DMA was not able to get the football back when they had a stop on 3rd and 5. And so obviously Archmere would have been punting. But then this young man spiked. It was a spike, right? Spiked the ball in celebration.
It was odd. It was he kind of had the ball in two hands. I went back and I watched this 10 times, and what I saw was just not enough for me. So I reached out to one of the referees I know who follows our account, and I asked him what happened, and he said he would check with the staff, and got back to me. And he said that it was a combination of things. One was the spike, but the other was that it was punctuated with one of the no expletives that was shouted. And
drat, was it
those
drat
two
or
things?
darn it? Gosh darn it.
It was. It was the ampersand sign, the pound sign, all that stuff. So those two together, and boy, it was just a killer. And you saw it while it was happening. I'm watching it, and I'm thinking. I reached out to a couple other people later, and I said, what was he doing? And it was different. Some people said that he was celebrating the play. He was just excited that they had forced the punt. Other people said, and there was a lot of people that said this actually, was that he thought there was a fumble in the middle of that pile, but apparently it came after the whistle. He ended up with the ball. And so I think it was a mix of excitement, frustration, whatever. The motive doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is the act itself and the word, or the magic word. And the referee put it to me this way: you shout that in a fashion where it's inappropriate. In that case, where it's with a spike, he said that's going to get you a penalty every time. Right. And what I love is that when it comes to officiating, a lot of people said, "Oh my God, how can you make that call?" To me, if you're going to make a call in the first 30 seconds of the game, you got to make the same call in the last 30 seconds of the game,
or the first game of the season.
Yes, and I love that there was no hesitation. I mean, that flag came out of his pocket and went up. It was as if we were in the first quarter of a game. It was no big deal, but it's just an unfortunate end, because this was, to me, the game of the year. I watched every second of this, and I loved it. The first half could not have been more different than their first meeting. I mean, DMA just dominated. Albaro, who is one of the top quarterbacks in the state, I've talked about him all season, turned the ball over twice in the first half. Once he was strip sacked, and the other was an interception, just a terrible decision. But you sort of got the feeling that, wow, that things are really out of sync here. But and I mentioned this at some point during the broadcast on Twitter, I think, was that they were lucky that DMA couldn't put drives away, and it was only 10-0 at halftime, because that was as one-sided a half as you'll see Archmere be on the wrong side of.
Right.
And I think DMA had some chances. There was a 4th and 1 toward close to halftime. They opted to kick the field goal. They have a good field goal kicker. He put it through, but there was 30-some seconds left, and I wondered, should they have gone for? I mean, the coach has done a great job all season, so you really can't second guess it. But only a 10-0 lead going into halftime, and then in the second half, boy, they come out and they're running a play action, and Albaro just hits a beauty in stride Connor Udovich for a 72-yard touchdown pass, and all of a sudden it's 10-7, and that flipped everything for about the next quarter and a half. I would say it was all Archmere. They scored 20 points in a row. All their 20 points came back to back, and then they stalled a little bit with about 8 minutes left in the game. They couldn't get anything going. DMA defense stiffened, and DMA did a nice job coming down the field. And I'll tell you, BJ Aline made one of the throws of the season, rolling to his right. He was almost to the sideline and unleashed it and still managed to keep it in bounds for a first down, a big first down for DMA. On the next play, he took it himself. I believe he went, 26 yards for the final touchdown to make it 2016. Missed the extra point. They actually, I shouldn't blame it on the kicker. The snap was flubbed. It was kind of all over the place, but it was great. Again, the Archmere defense stiffened. DMA. Archmere could not get a first down, and the foul came so late after the play. It was just shocking to the people there, and they let everyone know. But I thought, and I'll preface this by saying, I thought the officials all weekend, for the most part, did a fantastic job. I watched most of every game, going back and replay, and I thought the officiating on the weekend was for the most part fantastic, and I saw no problem. There was a punt that was a question about whether a guy was blocked into somebody, and I thought the referees handled it well. They got together, they made the decision. Of course, no replay, so these guys are going based on what they all saw.
Right.
So all in all, a really good ball game. It wasn't pretty. It was a ton of fun, and both teams absolutely left everything out on the field. There wasn't anything either of these teams could do more. And for Archmere, it was exhausting. They have, I noticed for most of the game, 7 guys would stay in after the offensive series, including Albero and Udovich. So, I mean, you have the star skill players out there, and they were exhausted at times because DMA, and I wanted to point this out, they did something they did not do in the first game. Now, everybody knows that there's a hurry up offense or the no huddle offense where you get to the line, but then you stand up and you take forever. DMA was, from the end of a play to the next snap, had to be within 12 seconds. I mean, DMA was flying up to the line of scrimmage. And I think a large part of that is Coach Lincoln saw there's so many of these kids that play 2 ways. Let's wear them down. And they did for quite a while. And they got back to it again late in the game, but just not enough, but a great effort. DMA, it was great to see. They got their first 2 wins ever in their playoff history. And for Archmere, the march continues. I've said all season, they just feel like a team of destiny to me. And yesterday makes me believe even more, coming back as calm, cool, and collected as they were from just a brutal first half, a great second half effort. And again, another great final to look forward to at the Class 2A level.
You forgot to mention, Marty, what you said on Twitter about Chris Albero having more than 500 yards on the ground.
Oh, my God.
Not carrying the football, just running back and forth to get the play.
I will never get this. And I put it out there as a random thought. But, yeah, Albero is one of those quarterbacks. And, again, Sally's does it. St. Elizabeth's does it. Where the quarterback comes to the sideline on every play to get the play. And when the ball is on the far hash, and let me tell you, Albero calls his own number, or they call his own number a lot. So he gets banged up.
Right.
He was running 30 yards, 15 to the coach and 15 back on most plays in the game. And I just said, I don't care who you are. At some point, that has to take a toll. I mean, you run 50 offensive plays, and you're running like a marathon out there. So, yeah, just an interesting little side thought. I can't believe with all the technology available today, and I know we don't have the helmet microphones in high school football, but at least not in Delaware. But the hand signals, the signs, something. I mean, I can't tell you how many plays have we seen blown up at the line of scrimmage because guys didn't get it right in a game, maybe 2 or 3 total. Right. So it's not something that happens all the time, but yeah, just a fun little fact there. I felt sorry for the kid. I'm like, my God, he's taking a beating, and then he's going to run 30 yards after every play. So interesting sidelight, but man, he weathered it well.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out why they got off to a slow start, and I looked at their schedule. I thought maybe it was playing at Boehner Stadium, but they played DMA there 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, 3 weeks ago, and it was part of their homecoming. So there was a big crowd then as well. This game was moved, if you remember. We didn't know this at the time, but it was moved because of a pot parade or a weed parade.
Yeah,
there were you found that
parades. The Christmas weed parade, which is a parade in Claymont they have for this little weed that grows in the middle of the road, and people decorate it. there was also a Christmas weed parade, which was competing with them across town. So I guess Archmere decided, you know what, where there's smoke, there's fire, John.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. But anyway.
So they decided to move the game to Abyssinia, which, you know what, by the size of the crowd was pretty cool because it looked like a lot of people were there. They were able to social distance more easily. And just a nice crowd, loud crowd.
Yeah.
Of course, DMA, we know DMA travels, man, and they only have to go a couple miles. They made a ton of noise yesterday.
Archmere's last time in the title game was 1982. No, I'm sorry. Last time they won was 1982. They were in the title game last year when they lost to Howard. So they're looking to pick up a little revenge here. And they're going to play Woodbridge. Woodbridge 24-14 winners over Wilmington Friends. 2 interceptions by Sciatric, Butter, as Marvin Dooley calls them. Stones were turned into touchdowns by Kenny Newton. And 5 minutes in or 7 minutes in or so in the first quarter, it was 16-0. Woodbridge does excellent on those 2-point conversions. Wilmington Friends did score 2 times in the fourth quarter, but it was basically over by that point to get to that 24-14 thing. Friends had 3 possessions at the end, but the Woodbridge defense came up. So it was 24-14 at 6:52 mark. Friends got the ball 3 more times, but Woodbridge not only held them, they didn't let them get past their own 38-yard line. So it was just an incredible job by Marvin Dooley's team. And I heard Benny Mitchell telling a story last night, Marty, on the broadcast, on the Middletown broadcast, where he called up to Marvin Dooley like later in the game, after the post-game show, everything else, most everybody was gone. And the coach said, he was just kind of thinking. And Benny said, what's up, coach? He said, you know what? I just don't think these kids understand what it takes to get where they are. He said, I'm so happy for him. But of course, Marvin Dooley's been through it as a player. He's, won a state championship as the head coach at William Penn back in 2014. And it's so true. When you roll through the season like Woodbridge, and when I say roll, they had more competitive games than a lot of the teams. And we both have talked about that. But they've had 2, not easy playoff games. No playoff game is easy, but they won 31-0. They were up 24-0 in this game before Friends scored a couple touchdowns. And he said, I'm so happy for these kids because they just don't realize what it takes to get to a state championship game and how they may never get back there. And so they're there. So
I think part of it is, it's a part of it is, and Kirk Herbstreit was talking about this on a broadcast yesterday, was no matter what level you are, it is so difficult to go undefeated.
Yeah.
Every game you've got to be at your best, or at some point in the game you have to be at your best. And for this 2A final, we've got 2 teams with a combined 24-0 record.
Yep.
So it's phenomenal. But when I was listening when Benny told that story, and I thought the same thing. I'm like, man, you roll through, as you said, through the season, you get to 12-0 and you think, oh God, this is easy. I always think whenever people say things like that, it's funny. I always think with kids, boy, tell them the Dan Marino story. Dan Marino always said, man, after my second season, we got to Super Bowl. I thought, God, I'm going to get here 10 more times and never made it again. So you can't take it for granted. And I'm sure they'll stress that during the week. But this was a game too that was a little bit of a disappointment. I thought Friends would be more competitive. Although it ended 24-14, the second touchdown for Friends was really fluky. Apparently Woodbridge, some of the players got the misconception or misread talk about running in and getting the signals from the coach. Somebody misread a signal, and a couple of the kids got the message that there was a call for a fake punt. So the blocking scheme completely fell apart. Friends just kind of waltzed through and blocked the punt, and one play later, it's 24-14. So it wasn't. It's not something that Friends really had to earn. Let's put it that way.
Right.
And then, as you said, they got the ball several times again, never got advanced past their own 38. The Woodbridge defense clamped down, and Woodbridge kind of did what Laurel did. They coasted in the second half. They did what they needed to do. They controlled the ball, and I liked how Marvin said he noticed something. With the passing game that Tattersall, because he has such a strong arm, he moved Butter back a few steps, and he said that really paid off for them. And of course, Marvin has been doing this for so long. I mean, he's going to pick up on every little thing. So it was kind of cool to get a look behind the curtain there.
Yeah, it was
preparation. So I was thrilled that he shared that. But great job by Woodbridge, and again sets up a 12-0 versus 12-0 final. And boy, I hope all these games are competitive, because if you look at them on paper, they are the best mashups we could hope for in the finals.
Woodbridge been in the finals 4 times in the last 6 years. They won the championship in 2016 and 2018. So see if Marvin Dooley can add to the legacy there, his own legacy, but also down at Woodbridge as well. That game is the 11 o'clock game. So it's going to be a good start to the day when you have 2 undefeated teams playing against each other. All right, let's move to Class 3A, the big boys, as some people call them. Smyrna with a 46-21 win over Dover, not as lopsided as that final score sounds. At halftime, it was 24-7 Smyrna, but Dover scored 14 points right off the bat in the third quarter to pull within 24-21. But then Smyrna ran off 3 straight touchdowns. Devin DeMoe and Wayne Knight with 2 as well. So, Marty, it turned out to be what a lot of people expected. But if you left this game at halftime, as I suggested I might have considered doing, you missed out on a really, really good third quarter. And congratulations to Dover and Chip Knapp in his first. I don't know if this is the first time he's ever been a head coach in high school. I don't know if he's one of those guys that went from playing in college to a graduate student to an assistant coach to a head coach. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, he certainly had a great first season. Semifinals, Dover was in there in 2018 when they lost to Sussex Central. I think I had that right. So Chip Knapp getting them back there in the future is certainly bright for the Dover Senators. But Smyrna looks like, Marty, they look like the team to beat when you look at how Middletown has struggled in the first half of their 2 playoff games. And so, again, we're not going to talk a lot about the championship game, but Smyrna was impressive. I think Mike Judy, you know what? My guess is he might be glad if he was honest about it. He may have said this. I didn't get a chance to look at the interviews that they got tested in that third quarter and that his team got tested because they hadn't been tested in a while. And so there's nothing wrong in playoff football if you get tested and you survive. You don't want to get tested and not survive, but his team got tested and he learned a lot about his team. The players learned a lot about themselves, and it's all positive heading into next week's championship game.
You know, I heard from a Middletown fan in that third quarter who said, because of the way Dover was scoring, that it was starting to get concerning because both scores were the result of fluky plays. The first one was a pass that was well defended by Smyrna, and Elijah Sessoms, the big tight end who's committed to the University of Delaware, kind of tipped it up in the air. I'm not sure he did it on purpose. I think he was going for the catch, but it went right to a streaking receiver, Parker, for Dover, who caught it in stride and continued to go the rest of the 35 yards for the touchdown. And then on the ensuing kickoff, and I believe Moran was the kickoff guy for Dover. He just drilled it, which they had been doing, kind of, skirting it along the ground a little bit. But, man, it went right into the chest of a Smyrna player and bounced backwards, one of the up men.
Right.
So Dover recovered it. And, I guess technically it's an onside kick. I don't believe it was on purpose. Or it was one of those things where they said, kick it as hard as you can and try to hit it at someone. If you miss, it'll go down the field. It'll bounce around. But if you hit it, which he did, they got right back into it. And to their credit, they took advantage of the drive. They came down and scored. And then, boy, I tell you, Wayne Knight, man, he is incredible. And, he's going to be doing this for, I can't remember, Stony Brook. Is that where he's going next season?
Stony Brook.
Okay. Boy, are they getting a weapon. I mean, he 280 yards on 26 carries, 4 2-point conversions. I posted on Twitter that he has scored more than 31 of the 46 teams in Delaware has himself points. So, they're a point machine as Smyrna. But, the way they responded was phenomenal. They never got they never lost their poise. They kept control of the game. Their defense really started to stiffen. I thought they did a really nice job. Knight, 156 of his rushing yards came in the fourth quarter, which kind of tells you they were just putting this away. Now, they did pull a Smyrna, which I call it, when up 40-21, they got the ball back with 4.5 minutes, no timeouts for Dover, and promptly threw a 40-yard bomb that just missed being a touchdown. Cameron Edge just overthrew it, and you thought, oh, boy, here we go again. But then they went back to the ground. Knight finished it off with another touchdown. So I agree with you 100%. And we'll talk about Middletown in a minute, and we'll get into the full thing later this week. But, yeah, Middletown has struggled. Middletown does not look as good as they did in that first meeting with Smyrna. Smyrna appears to be a completely different team. And I said last week on our podcast, I think it took a while for Cam Edge and this offense to gel. But, boy, they're hitting on all cylinders now.
And that's how Mike Judy set the schedule up. I think he was thrilled. Let's get, let's go to New Jersey, play a top team in the country, and show ourselves that there's still room to get better. And then they lost to Middletown 28-14, but it was tied going in the fourth quarter. And then they kind of rolled after that with a couple tests in between. They're back in the title game after a 3-year hiatus following 3 state championships from 2015 to 2017. They beat Middletown the last 2 of those 3 state championships in that final game. So it should be interesting. Middletown 33-15 over Sally's. Marty, this game looked a lot like the Apo game the week before in the first half. I watched every snap. I actually kept track of things that were going on. The game started off, Marty. I actually tuned in at 7:04, and already Middletown was up 6-0. And I'm like, what happened? And it was Zaire Tart's 95-yard kickoff return to make it 6-0.
Yep.
Middletown had 4 turnovers in the first half. Sally's only 34 yards unofficially of offense in the first half. And the only touchdown came on a short fumble after a Middletown a short field after a Middletown fumble. Middletown scores on a pick 6 to make it 12-7 at the half. There were 2 Middletown touchdowns, then a Sal's touchdown in the second half, and then Zaire Tart on a pick 6 at the 95-yard return ends it. So ironically, he had 2 95-yard runs, one with a kickoff and one with a pick 6. So, Marty, I never felt that Sally's was going to win it, but until that pickoff, that 95-yard pickoff and pick 6 and went back, that was the only time I felt, okay, this is over. Let's start talking about next week. And, so it's just, I don't know. Middletown, if I'm a Middletown fan, I'm concerned about how we've started the last 2 playoff games. In the Apple game, you can use the excuse is maybe the wrong word, but even Coach Blum said, we learned in the first half of the Apple Quinnipiac game that the playoffs are different and you've got to show up from the start and you got to be ready to go. So they supposedly learned that lesson. And yeah, you can say, well, they returned a kickoff to, what more can you ask? Well, you didn't do much offensively after that in the first half and you got to win. And that's all you're trying to do, win and get to the next step. And they did that. But there's got to be some concern on the Middletown side of things going up against a Smyrna team, which hasn't had that lapse, maybe other than the first 10 minutes of the third quarter against Dover. But offensively, Smyrna has been ready to go for the entire games, throughout the playoffs. That's not been the case for Middletown. And Middletown's been fortunate to play 2 teams that they're better than. And so they were able to recover. That may not be the case at Delaware Stadium.
Yeah, this was an interesting game. As you said, the first half, gosh, Middletown, they just looked so out of sync. The whole game was kind of fits and starts for them. They'd have a big play here and then a turnover there, all kinds of miscues. And it's funny. You hate to say it, but it almost looks like they've lost focus somewhat on who they are, the identity of the team. I mean, sometimes you get Braden Davis throwing the ball deep. Sometimes they just go to the running game, but it just seems to be disjointed right now. And Sally's was able to take advantage of it in the first half. Now, again, the Middletown defense is such that the offense can do things like that for right now. I mean, against these kind of teams, I mean, Sally's, yes, they have a better offense than they had before, but you and I believe in the preview talked about, they just didn't have the weapons to keep up with a Middletown defense that swarms the ball. And Connor Campbell, for his part, he did a great job trying to get things going on the ground. Every now and then he'd pop off a little run, but for the most part, they did it look like it, kind of like we were talking on the podcast as well, as they contained him. They never really let him get around to the edges and get outside. So they made him do everything up the middle, and they made him pay the price a number of times. It was a hard hitting game, but in the second half, the talent took over, the individual talent, and Middletown was able to pull away a bit. But I agree that there's just something missing right now with Middletown and the Smyrna defense. Again, excuse me, as I said, one of the touchdowns was a long, fluky touchdown. And then, of course, you had the onside kick. So even the defense for the last 4 games, the Smyrna defense has really played well consistently throughout the game, I would say. This is going to be an interesting week at Middletown because they're going to have to get back to basics and what they were doing early in the season, because this Smyrna team is not in any way the team that they played in the second game of the season, I believe, or second or third game of the season. I don't really count that first Meade game that Middletown played, which was forfeited in the second quarter. But yeah, this is Smyrna. If you look at the 2 tracks of the teams, yes, they've both been very successful, but Smyrna has been consistently good on both sides of the ball. Middletown has been consistently good on defense, but man, it's just been a struggle on offense every now and then to get things going. And yesterday was a big one. And if they put that performance out in the first half against Smyrna, no way. They're going to they can't fall behind by a lot, because as good as Davis is and some of these other kids, I don't think they're going to be a great come from behind team against a defense that kind of, licks its chops and gets after the quarterback as Smyrna does. So again, we'll get into that more during the week, but an impressive performance by Sally's over the season. Last year they had they looked like they were going to be left out of the COVID shortened season. They ended up not making the playoffs. They come back this year. They had kind of a new look offense. Connor Campbell was phenomenal. So a great job by them reaching the semifinals. Mm-hmm. But again, we get the rematch of the Harvest Bowl, which is what we all wanted to see in the finals.
Yep, and it was Middletown's first game against a Delaware opponent when they faced off in the official. It was week 2, which is technically the third week of the season, but here nor there, it was at the beginning of the season. And Sally's kind of flew under the radar all year. We talked about that at the beginning of the season, that, Bill Denardo probably was right where he wants his team, knowing that they're good enough to get into the semifinals. Who knows, maybe the championship, but not everybody's talking about them. And, it was the big 3 for a while, and then Dover knocked off St. George's. So Dover got into the conversation, and they struck, so it went back and forth. So certainly nothing to hang their heads on for Salesianum, and they'll be back next year, just like they always are. For the Cavaliers, it's their 10th championship game since 2010. But Marty, somebody said they haven't won since 2012. And I'm like, really? It's been that long since they won? I know that was Chris Godwin and Darius Wade, but even they only won. Well, I think they ended up winning 2 championships maybe in their 4 years there. I forget so, exactly. Yeah. And, but still, when you think of Middletown, you think, man, they win it every year. Well, no, they don't. they get there every year.
I was going to say they virtually get there every year, but
they don't win.
They're 0 for their last 6, I believe.
Yeah, and Zach Blum has not won. As successful as he's been as the head coach there, he has not won a state championship, because that was Mark Del Percio's team that won it back in 2012. Right. So that game's going to kick off at 3:30. That should be a good one. That one should start right on time because the unified game is being played before that, and they've slotted the unified game to be 2 hours, and they typically take an hour and a half max usually. So as long as that game starts on time, the unified game, then the 3:30 game should kick off on time as well. And again, we'll use this just as a reminder. Don't think you're going to show up and pay $10 and get in. That's not how it works. You got to have an electronic ticket. It's $10 for the whole day, I think.
It is.
I know it is for the whole day, and I think it's $10. It is, yeah. And if you want fancy seats, which are the bucket seats in front, between the 20 and the 20 and down low, you can pay, it's 15 or 20, I think, for those. So not a bad seat in Delaware Stadium. The crowd's going to be anywhere from 10 to 12,000 people. That's what they had a couple years ago. Last time the Class 3 game was this big, or what at the time it was Division 1. But again, there's health protocols on the way in, and I'm not going to go through them all, but just realize you're not going to show up, hand somebody $10 in cash and walk in the stadium. And there's a lot of other things you got to go through. They are simple, so don't let it deter you. It's a health check the day of that you do online. It takes about 30 seconds. And then you just got to prove that you've either vaccinated or you've got a negative test from 72 hours. And it can't be a home test. That's a key thing. So it can't be a home test. So if you're planning to go and you're not vaccinated, figure out where you're going to get tested sometime on Thursday or Friday. Should be a great Class 3 championship game. At least I hope so. So, all right, with that, let's talk about our top player and top performance. My top player, Marty, is Zaire Tart. Start and finished with a 95-yard kickoff and a 95-yard pick 6. Doesn't get a whole lot better than that for him. It was a great beginning and a great ending to the Middletown game. So Zaire Tart is my player of the week.
And mine's Wayne Knight, who just did everything. They knew he was going to get the ball all game long. Dover did. They still weren't able to stop him. He caught the ball out of the backfield. He runs the ball well. 280 yards, 26 carries, 3 touchdowns, 4 2-point conversions. They continue to roll. So for that reason, Wayne Knight's my player of the week.
Also want to give a shout out to Seatric Stones. He had those 2 interceptions that turned into 2 touchdowns and put his team up, Woodbridge, 16-0 midway through the first quarter on the way to that championship. My top performance from a unit is the Laurel defensive line on punts. We talked about this against Indian River 3 different times. Laurel was not able to get a punt off. 1 was blocked. The other 2, the punter was just swarmed under. And I'm not sure if all 3 of those turned into Laurel touchdowns, but they certainly set the tone for the game. And I can imagine at least 1, if not 2 of them turned into Laurel touchdowns. So the defensive line on the punting unit for the Laurel Bulldogs is my top performing unit of the week.
And sticking along those same lines, I went with the Woodbridge defensive line. They did everything to stop. They really couldn't get anything going on that side of the ball. And I think that, they've kept them in the game all season. What I love is that they get pressure on the quarterback and they get to the running backs without having to blitz. And it frees up the guys in the defensive backfield. Again, there was a fluky punt block that got Friends into the game at all. But otherwise, Friends was just stymied at every turn. And the biggest was when they got within 10, and you could tell Friends felt like the momentum was huge. That defensive line clamped down, and as you pointed out, never let them pass their own 38-yard line. So for that reason, the Woodbridge defensive line is my unit of the week.
Alrighty, so there you have it. It's going to be the last weekend of high school football coming up. We're going to drop a podcast on Thursday previewing all 3 championship games, classes 1, 2, and 3. So we appreciate you tuning into that. Let your friends know about it, especially if you know people who are involved in that game in any way, and they may not be listeners to the podcast. We appreciate that. Let us know your opinions, too, what you think are going to happen. You can reach out to us on Twitter at DE Sports Debate. Marty's handle is Marty Debate. Mine is John Buzby, no H in that. And so reach out to us. We enjoy having the conversation with those that have already done that to us. And you can also comment on Facebook, and we'll share your comments on when we talk about it. So please do that for us. All right.